You mentioned priestly gifts in your response to the first question, and as I, as a relatively new priest, look at the upcoming span of my career and seeing the potential changes over that time and how the church will be organized and how it will be supported, and in light of what Bishop Curry said this morning about the cost and everything, what are you thinking, and what is the church thinking about the formation of priests for the coming years? And I think that's a question not just that pertains to clergy, but to all of us who are responsible for calling up people who feel called to be in ministry. At one time, the expectation was that ministry came with a title and a pension and maybe a place to live, and certainly respect in the community. That's changing rapidly, and so I wonder, what is the church in general sort of doing to thinking about is how priestly ministry, how ordained ministry will look in the coming decades?
Who are the ministers of the church? Lay people, bishops, priests, and deacons. Part of the challenge, and some of the language you offered us, which is the language in which many people talk about ministry, reflects an era in the church's history that grows out of Christendom, that grows out of assuming that Christianity is the norm in a culture, in this culture, and that we set aside people to be specialists. And that setting those people aside means and I don't want to mean this in a derogatory way at all, but we fence them in. We own them. They're captive. There are jokes about this being a collar and a leash. I think we're coming into a time of remembering some of the ways in which priestly ministry has been exercised in other seasons of the church's history, when the church has been more on the road, where, like Paul, people had another way of earning a living. When I was in Nevada, we didn't send anybody to seminary or invite anybody into discernment for ordained vocation without saying, you need to have a way to earn a living. You cannot expect that the church will pay you to do this full-time until retirement. Because it depends on a model of having 200 pledging units. That's not where we are likely to be 20 years from now. That said, I think we need as many fully stipended clergy as the church can produce, but we're going to use them very differently. We're not going to settle them in one parish and say, you serve these 150 people or 300 people. We're going to ask those specialists to support the ministry of many other kinds of leaders, lay leaders, priests in secular occupations who help in congregations or faith communities part of the time, helping to develop new faith communities and the leaders who will call those new faith communities into being. But I don't think we can depend on serving for 30 or 40 years on the church's payroll and getting a pleasant pension at the end of it. I think we're in a season of significant shift, and I think there is freedom in that shift. If you remember your church history, in the 1800s, the Church of England was one of the leaders in what was the Tractarian movement, the Anglo-Catholic movement. Many of the priests in that movement worked in the inner city, in factories. They were called worker priests. They got paid in the job they held in those places, and they served as a priest in the midst of that. I think that's one image for what priestly ministry may look like in this century. And I think it's a very creative, faithful, intriguing kind of image of what one way in which we're going.